Racial rebellions of the 60s. Come on in, retweet it. We're going hard tonight. We're gonna be doing this for a couple of hours. There are four, and then there's two, then there's one. Hey, Brother Mark, I have a new song, Brother Mark. I'm not gonna share it yet. Uh, okay. Hold on. There you go. All right. Okay. I do have a new song. I have a new song. Come on in, guys. Let's see if we can get this done started in the next few minutes. Just trying to get myself together. Uh, I think I am going to put this up on Twitter. Uh, okay. Okay. Yeah, it's on all channels. All channels. Let me see. Make certain that we're good here. And get that out the way. And I just have all of these phenomenal texts. And I was thinking of doing an oldie but a goodie first. An oldie but a goodie. And I had the Kerner Commission study. I think I'm going to read some of it. You know, let me see, I'm about to go live on one of my Twitter accounts. And good. Here we are. And I'm about to jump into form, retweet this, like it, share it. We are not begging for an audience, but we definitely have some worthwhile stuff. I've never shared this book with people. I might read something from it just to lead into it. And I got this other one. I hope you guys liked a little bit of stuff I did from lynching. I feel like doing a little bit of this David Walker as we go through it. Yeah, I got all my stuff stacked up here. Wonderful. We have a quorum. We got our quorum. As many people is going to do this. Let me see what's a good place to start in here. Let's see. He said this. If the index will help me with this, it may not. I want you to hear from this. Mm-hmm. Okay, I love this. Here we go. Hey, Sister Star. Hey, everybody. Okay, good. Welcome to the Angry Black Men's Book Club. I am your host and your semi literate servant. I'm none other than Dr. Randy Short. Pardon my stain on my shirt. You may not see it. I want to welcome everybody. I love this. I'm in chapter 3 of this wonderful. Um, mhm, mm, 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 mhm, mm. I'm looking. Oh, this is so wild. Okay, I love this. I think this is the best thing. Chapter 3. Let's see what. Okay, you might even find this is wild. Hmm. Hold on. I'm trying to see where I want to put this. I'm I'm just looking to a reprint of a book I'm gonna tell you about in a minute. Hmm. Okay, so it's right up in here. 3. Okay. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. 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 3 and 4. 3 and 4. I may skip through this, but 3 and 4. All right. Oh, it's a minute after. Okay. Hey guys, I'm gonna kick this off because some of my favorite people are in law, the law field, and this is a reprint of a book from the 1800s called A Sketch of the Laws Relating to Slavery in Several States of the United States of America by George McDowell Stroud. And when you hear some of this, you're going to find how similar some of the things that were for slaves are for us today. I'm correct, it's 1827. And I'm going to read some of this and I'm going to go through maybe chapters here and there because you can't always tell it all. But this is chapter 3 from Stroud's. I'm going to read some of this, and this is other conditions of the slave considered as a member of civil society. Uh, to speak of a slave as a member of civil society may by some be regarded as a solecism. Such a condition, however, is recognized by the law of the slaveholding states. To what extent and for what purpose it is recognized will be sufficiently manifested in the course of this chapter, which, for the sake of perspicuity, will be arranged and examined under the following titles. Number 1, a slave cannot witness against a white person either in civil or criminal cause. Let me just say to you, we're seeing this right now before the trial starts for, what's that kid's name? Carmelo Anthony. Number 2, he cannot be part in a civil suit. You saw this happen with the high tech social media people, I think Google. Blacks were excluded. Benefits of education are withheld from the slave. We have inferior education to this day. They're calling everything DEI and destroying it. The means for moral and religious instruction are not granted to the slave. On the contrary, the efforts of the humane and charitable to supply these wants are discontinued by law. What they now do is you can't get federal money if the churches do too much to stand up for black folk. 5. Submission is required of the slave, not to the will of his master only, but to that of all other white persons. The penal code for Carmelo, he's supposed to do what those white boys said because he's black. A lot of y'all don't realize this stuff carries over. This is still part of our culture and this society. Do what white folks say if you want things to work out for you. If you don't do what they say, you could have a problem. They told him to move, and he didn't move. And even though they weren't teachers and had no authority, and an official since they were white, he stabbed them, one of them, and that's sort of back in the day, that would have been his death. 6. Penal codes of slaveholding states bear much more severely upon slaves than upon white persons. 7. Slaves are prosecuted and tried upon criminal accusation as a manner inconsistent with the rights of humanity. Let's repeat that one. Slaves are prosecuted and tried upon criminal accusation in a manner inconsistent with the rights of humanity. In other words, the human rights of people like now, the Karens and people that accuse and say stuff and the police come, that's from slavery. That happens right now. We live it today. We're still living this in a new manifestation, or at least a modified. Number 1, a slave cannot be a witness against a white person, either in a civil or criminal cause. I have on occasion very frequently to advert this subject as the cause of the greatest evils of slavery. Acts of assembly apparently intended to give protection to the slave from the master's cruelty have been adduced and yet shown to be altogether nugatory. In the consequence of the rule of law, which forms of this title, this section, in truth, in our slaveholding states, this exclusion is not confined to the evidence of slaves, but natives of Africa and their descendants, whatever may be the shade of their complexion, whether bond or free, are under the like degrading disability. In a few of the slaveholding states, the rule derives its authority from custom. I always taught you about custom and law. It's a custom to let white folk beat your ass. Back in the slavery days, as it said here, submission was required of the slave, not to the will of his master only, but to that of all other white people. That's been the custom where a white person could correct you, could beat you. This was the norm. It was certainly the norm when I was a child. That's from slavery. And in fact, what typically happened back then is a black parent would beat their child in front of white people to show their submission. It happened to me once or twice. Custom. And others, legislatures have sanctioned it and expressed enactment. In Virginia, there's an act of the assembly in these words: any Negro or mulatto, bond or free, shall be a good witness and pleas of the Commonwealth for and against Negroes or mulattoes, bond or free, and civil pleas where free Negroes or mulattoes alone shall be parties, and in no other cases whatsoever. Such being the law, it requires no extraordinary perspicacity to pronounce that the effects must be the most injurious to the unhappy victims of slavery. It places a slave who is seldom within view of more than one white person at a time entirely at the mercy of this individual without regard to his fitness for the exercise of power, whether his temper be mild and merciful or fierce and vindictive. A white man may with impunity, if no other white be present, torture, maim, and even murder his slave in the midst of any number of Negroes and mulattoes, having absolute dominion over his slave. The master of his delegate, if disposed to commit illegal violence upon him, may easily remove him to a spot safe from the observation of a competent witness. Indeed, it is probable few white persons ordinarily reside upon the same plantation, since I find in most slaveholding states, owners of slaves are compelled by a considerable penalty to keep at least one white man on each plantation to which a certain number of slaves is attached, a law which would not have been necessary unless the contrary practice was prevalent. Plain and conclusive at this reasoning must be, in the mind of any candid person, I think it best, nevertheless, to corroborate it by direct testimony of several distinguished persons whose means of information entitle them to speak with authority. Sir William Young, then governor of Tobago, and an advocate for slavery, thus expressed himself in 1811. Instances of bad treatment and cruelty and of unjust and immoderate punishment of slaves, I think, occur exclusively within the narrow trading of the household circle of unattached slaves, and I am sorry to say, have frequently been reported to me where circumstances of atrocity to be believed, though for some reason, which I shall not give, not be proved against the lower white or colored people domineering over from 2 to 10 or more wretched beings, their slaves. In such cases, what protection by law have the slaves against the abuse of power over them by Europeans or other free people? I think the slaves have no protection. In this, I doubt that not every other island there are laws for the protection of slaves and good ones, but circumstances in the administration of whatever law render it a dead letter. When the intervention of the law, he continues, is most required, it will have the least effect, as in cases where a vindictive and cruel master has care to commit the most atrocious cruelties, even to murder his slave, no free person being present to witness the act. There appears to me a radical defect in the administration of justice throughout the West Indies. In whatever case the wrongs done to the slave are under consideration, or rather, that justice cannot in truth be administered, controlled as it is by the law of evidence, which covers the most guilty European with impunity, provided that when having criminal intent he is cautious not to commit the crime in the presence of free witnesses. I should consider it inconsistent with the respect and deference I bear the sagacity and wisdom of the august body for which this report is framed, to idly enlarge it with the enumeration of humane laws for the protection of slaves, all rendered nugatory by the condition of evidence required in their administration. And let me see. See for the extract of this from Sir William Young report, Stephen's West Indian Slavery. Mr. Stephen has collected the statements of many other holding official stations in the British West India colonies, all concurring in relationship to this one point, the inefficacy of all laws made for the protection of slaves and the consequence of the rejection of the testimony of slaves. I avail myself of an additional citation from this source. The Chief Justice of the island of St. Vincent gives the following answer to the parliamentary inquiries proposed to him in the year 1791. The only instances in which their slave persons appear to be protected by the letter of the law are in cases of murder, dismemberment, and mutilation. And in these cases, as the evidence of slaves is never admitted against the white man, the difficulty of establishing the facts is so great that white men are in a manner put beyond the reach of the law. I subjoin a further proof, not that I consider the present topic difficult of explanation, but because what I now adduce is borrowed from the authentic records of slaveholding state of our own country. The Negro Act of South Carolina contains the following preamble in one of its sections. Whereas by reason of the extent and distance of the plantations in this province, the inhabitants are far removed from each other, and many cruelties may be committed on slaves, because no white person may be present to give evidence of the same. After such admissions of the evils of this law, we are naturally induced to inquire what reasons have led to its adoption, especially what can justify its continuance. It is alleged by its advocates that it is coeval in the institution of slavery, and they add, moreover, as if this circumstance were of great moment, that slavery has existed since the time of Noah. The servitude under some form is of a very remote antiquity. There can be no doubt, but it cannot be established, it is believed, by proofs at all worthy of reliance, that the rejection of the testimony of the slave has always been a concomitant evil. If indeed it could be shown that such had in all ages been the misfortune of the oppressed, it would not surely on that account carry conviction of a justice or of the rejection to the mind of anyone who rightly weighs the claim of humanity, and who believes that to do, justify, love, and mercy are the duties of inflexible and perpetual obligation. The lineage, this is English slavery, friends, as it existed in England, furnishes no authority for the universal application of this rule. A villain, you get the word villain from English slaves, people. A villain was a good witness in civil cases against anyone except his lord, and he might prosecute his lord in the king's name if violence done to this person. It is right to presume in such a case he must have been admitted as a witness against him also. And without doubt, criminal cases generally, there is no exception for witness that he was a villain or a bondsman. We must have recourse in the civil law for its profitable origin. The general rule was that certain laws, certainly was, that a slave could not be a witness, though there were some exceptions to it, found in reason and policy for men of that condition, might be examined when the welfare of the state in cases of weight and difficulty required such a departure from the general principles of when other evidence was unattainable. This latter exception, it is obvious, destroys the rule if we are to understand that by it a slave might be examined and the defect of other proof for the inculpation of any offender against the laws, and such I suppose by the true meaning, since the slaves might always induce an investigation by flying the statute of princes. A privilege would be of little value unless the slave could be examined as a witness against his injurer, and if admissible in his own case with much more propriety, could be heard on behalf of third persons where feelings of interest would not operate bias against him. It may safely be averred, I believe, that the rule of this evidence, to the extent to which it obtains in our slaveholding states, cannot challenge for its support of the authority of any country, either ancient or modern. For it must not be forgotten that it is not evidence of slaves only which is rejected by it. It applies equally to colored persons, or rather to the descendants of Africans, as well as those who are free as those who are slaves. This being the case, I shall briefly discuss the propriety of it as it whole compass. What do you guys think? So you couldn't even tell anybody, and it didn't matter, and therefore people had the right to kill based on how they felt like it. I'm not going to do all of this, but I love this. And I'm looking at this thing. This is America, where people say that, let me add this. I'm going to skip down here. I'm in number 2 now. A slave cannot be a party to a civil suit. let me read this. The oldest law of this description appears to have been adopted by South Carolina in the year 1740. It begins with what has already extracted, but which, for the sake of perspicuity, it will be proper to repeat, be enacted all Negroes, Indians, free Indians in amity with this government, and Negroes and mulattoes and mestizos now free accepted. I want to go back and explain that to you again, that Negroes, Indians, free Indians in amity with the government, Indians at peace with the government, and Negroes, and mulattoes, and mestizos now free accepted, meaning that all these different types of people that folks say they are, that were Aboriginal, these people used to recognize that in the law, and then all of a sudden everybody became black. Not that I knock it, I prefer the consolidation, but they recognize Indians and mix between Indian and black, white and different people, but then all of a sudden they did that. That's in the laws, people. So for folks who say you don't have any Indian ancestry, it's a lie. Okay. Mulattoes and mestizos who are now or shall hereafter be in this province, all their issue and offspring born or to be born shall be, and they are hereby declared, and to be, and for remain forever, hereafter, absolute slaves, and shall follow condition of the mother, etc., etc., provided that any Negro, Indian, mulatto, or mestizo claim his or her freedom, it shall and may be lawful for such Negro, Indian, mulatto, or mestizo, or any person or persons whatsoever on his or her behalf apply to the judges of His Majesty's Court of Common Pleas by petition or motion, either during or sitting in the court or before any of the justices of the same court at any time in vacation, and the said court of any of the justices thereof, that they are hereby fully empowered to admit that person applying to be a guardian for any Negro, Indian, mulatto, or mestizo, claiming his or her or their freedom, and such a guardian being able and entitled, capable in law, to bring an action of trespass in the nature of ravishment of ward, or against any person who shall claim property, or who shall be in the possession of any such Negro, Indian, mulatto, or mestizo, and the defendant shall and may plead the general issue in such an action brought, and the special matter may and shall be given in evidence, and upon general specific verdict found, judgment shall be given according to the very right of the cause, without having any regard to the defect of the proceedings, either in form or substance. And if judgment is given for the plaintiff, a special jury shall be made declaring that the ward of the plaintiff is free, and the jury shall access damages which the plaintiff's ward has sustained, and the court shall give judgment and award execution against the defendant for such damages, with the full cost of suit. But in cases a judgment shall be given for the defendant, the court is hereby fully empowered to inflict such collateral punishment, not extending to life or limb of the ward of the plaintiff, as they in their discretion shall think fit. So don't beat them to death. Provided that any action suit be brought in pursuance of the direction of this act, but the burden of proof shall lay upon the plaintiff, as it shall always be presumed that every Negro, Indian, mulatto, and mestizo is a slave, unless contrary be made to appear. Indians in amity with this government accepted, in which case the burden of proof shall be on the defendant. In Georgia, the Act of the Assembly, May 1770. It is impossible for any humane or reflecting person to examine the provisions of the above law without the conviction of the injustice and cruelty. The Negro and etc. claim to be free, yet he can bring no suit to investigate his master's title or restrain him of his liberty, unless one can be found merciful enough to become his guardian, subject in any event to the expense of troubling and conducting his cause, and the case of failure, the cost of the suit. In other words, if you're nigger love, it costs. The judges and jurors will, in all probability, be slaveholders and interested, therefore, in some measure in the question of which they are to try. The whole community in which he lived may, so few are the exception, be said to be hostile to his success. Being a Negro, etc., by the word of the act, the burden of proof rests upon him, and he is presumed to be a slave till he make a contrary appear. This is to be effected through the instrumentality of white witnesses, as has been shown exclusively to the testimony of those who are not white, even though they may be free and of the fairest character. And lastly, notwithstanding all the obstacles to the ascertaining of the truth of the allegations, the terror superadded that should he not succeed, if you don't succeed, even if you get that, the judge and the jury has the right of freedom to the infliction of corporal punishment to any extent short of capital execution or the deprivation of a limb. How do you like that? This is actually the law of this country, guys. It's still hardwired into it. We're still dealing with this, and that's how we got this mess. I'm going to skip over to part 5 because this is a key thing. I love this. I love this. This is a really good one. And I'm going to stop after this. We'll stop at this and we'll go to another work. But this is from Strout's Sketch of the Laws in Slave States, 1827. Number 5, submission is required of the slave, right? The slave is to kiss behind, guys. In 1696, the question of whether the baptism of a Negro slave, in other words, becoming a Christian, without the privity or consent of his masters, emancipated the slave, underwent an elaborate discussion before the judges of the King's Bench. Owing to a misconception of the form of the action, the final decision was not given, and the plaintiff being, of course, unsuccessful on that occasion, the doubts which have resulted from the former case were strengthened rather than impaired. Let me stop and say to you that because of the Crusades, it used to be seen by custom that it was wrong for Christians to enslave each other. So there was a major incentive for people to become Christians, and of course, white folks shifted that around to make certain, no, even if you like white Jesus, you still have to pick my cotton and get your ass beat by me. And it doesn't matter what a decent person you are. And to this day, that kind of behavior, if you're black, you're just bad. And so let me skip over some. So I love that. You have to do what you're told by everyone. Okay? So submission is required of the slave, not to the will of his master only, but to the will of all other white persons. While the institution of slavery exists, everything like resistance to the master's lawful authority should be decisively checked. Strict subordination must be exacted from the slave, or bloodshed and murders will unavoidably ensue. The laws of slaveholding states demand, however, a much larger concession of power to the master than is here granted. They demand that the life of the slave shall be in the master's keeping, that the slave having the physical ability to avoid infliction of a barbarous or vindictive punishment by his master shall not be permitted to do so. You have no right to stand your ground, Carmelo Anthony. In 2025, Black Americans, when you defend yourself, you don't have the right. This goes back to it was a law and now it's a custom. Someone bothers you, you swing back and you get put in jail like a criminal because of the custom that you had no right to defend yourself. That the slave having the physical ability to avoid the infliction of a barbarous and vindictive punishment by his master shall not be permitted to do so. You must take the abuse. They go indeed beyond this. They place the slave under the like restriction in relation to every white person without discrimination as to character, with as little consideration as to the motives. That means if you're a black woman, a slave back in the day, if a drunk, dirty man wants to rape you, you're to give it to him. This is what slavery was. So non-slave holding whites were doing stuff, and you had to take it. Okay, this is what we have. You can't say no. Thus, it enacted in Georgia, quote, if any slave shall presume to strike any white person, such a slave upon trial and conviction before the justice or justices, according to the directions of this act, shall for the first offense suffer such punishment as the said justice or justices shall, and his or their discretion think fit, not extending to life or limb, and for the second offense suffer death. If you even try to fight a second time, you must die. The law of South Carolina, as in the same words, except that the death is not made punishment in the second, but the third offense. In both of these states, a proviso is annexed to this law, which shows plainly that however wanton or dangerous may the attack be upon the slave, he is still compelled to submit, provided always that striking, etc., be done by the command and in defense of the person or property of the owner, or other persons having the care of the government of such a slave, in which case the slave shall be wholly excused, and the owner of the other person shall be answerable as if the act had been committed by himself. In Maryland, the Act of 1723, a justice of peace for the offense may direct the offender's ears to be cropped. In other words, your ears cut off. And this, though he be a free black. In Kentucky, the same general principle is recognized, though enforced by penalties much less severe. Yet there in Maryland, free persons included, if any Negro, mulatto, or Indian, bond or free, shall at any time lift his or her hand in opposition to any person not being Negro, mulatto, or Indian, he or she so offending shall for every such offense prove by the oath of the party, this based on the word, whatever that white person said they did, before the justice of the peace of the county where such offense shall be committed, receive 30 lashes on his or her back, well laid by the order of such justice. Nearly similar to this law in Kentucky was that of Virginia. From the year 1680 to the year 1792, at which that latter date following the exception was added, except in those cases where it shall appear such justice that a Negro or mulatto was wantonly assaulted and lifted his or her hand in her defense. There's a section of the law in Louisiana which, though in terms applying to free people of color only, may be properly cited as evidence of the sentiments which are entertained there on this subject. The gravity with which the strange principle is asserts is declared will itself excuse the introduction here, though not altogether congruous with the main object of the sketch. Quote, free people of never color ought never to insult or strike white people, nor presume to conceive of themselves as equal to whites, but on the contrary, they ought to yield to them on every occasion and never speak or answer them, but with respect under the penalty of imprisonment according to the nature of that offense. Several slaveholding states have adopted laws which are highly objectionable for the reasons just given. Subjoined may they be taken as a specimen. If every slave shall happen to be slain for refusing to surrender him or herself, contrary to the law, or unlawfully resisting any officer or other person who shall apprehend or endeavor to apprehend such slave or slaves, etc., such officer or other such persons, so killing such a slave as aforesaid, making resistance shall be, and he by this act indemnified from any prosecution for such killings. In other words, if someone wanted to kill 4 or 5 people because they felt like it, nothing could be done about it. If I'm a freaky, violent, sociopath, racist, I want to shoot a couple of black people and go nigger hunting with someone else's slave stock. If I say they attacked me, I feared for my life. Boom, boom, boom. They'd all pat him on the back and say, man, you did the best you could. That's the law. And by the Negro Act of 1740 of South Carolina, it's declared, quote, if any slave who shall be out of the house of the plantation where such a slave shall live, or shall usually be employed without some white person in the company of such slave, shall refuse to submit to undergo the examination of any white person. What they want to touch your penis or your vagina? Still, of any white person. It shall be lawful for any white person to pursue, apprehend, and moderately correct such a slave. And if such slave assault and strikes a white person, such a slave may be lawfully killed. Justifiable homicide. This is what happens with Tamir Rice and with Eric Garner and so many other people. You can be killed because I'm white. I felt like it. You wonder where this comes from, and it hasn't stopped. Now I'm at my favorite part, and this is almost over, and we can go to another work. But how do y'all like this? How y'all like this, Sister Star? Are y'all getting this? And I mean, the land of the free and home of the brave, and black people complain too much, and oh, nobody should have reparations, and every slaves were happy. Okay. I'm at part 6, and this is the last part I'm going to go through. The penal codes of slaveholding states bear much more severely upon slaves than upon white persons. Being ignorant of letters, unenlightened by religion, deriving but little instruction from good example, cannot be supposed to have the right conceptions as to the nature and extent of moral or political obligations. This remark, with but a slight qualification, is applicable to the condition of a slave. It has just been shown that the benefits of education are not conferred upon him, while his chance of acquiring knowledge of the precept of the gospel is so remote as scarcely is to be appreciated. He may be regarded, therefore, as almost without the capacity to comprehend the force of laws, and, on this account, Such are designed for the government should be recommended by the simplicity and mildness. His condition suggests another motive for the tenderness on his behalf in these particulars. He is unable to read, and holding little or no communication with those who are better informed than himself, how is he to become acquainted with the fact that a law for his observance has been made? To exact obedience to a law which has not been promulgated, which is unknown to the subject of it, has ever been deemed more unjust and tyrannical. The reign of Caligula, were it obnoxious to no other reproach than this, would never cease to be remembered with abhorrence. The lawgivers of the slaveholding states seem, and the formation of their penal codes, to have been uninfluenced by these claims of the slave upon their compassionate consideration. The hardest convict moves their sympathy, and it is to be taught that the laws before is expected to obey them. Yet the guiltless slave is subjected to an extensive system of cruel enactments, of no part which probably has he ever heard. Parts of this system apply to the slave exclusively, and for every infraction a large retribution is demanded. While with respect to offenses for which whites as well as slaves are amenable, the punishments are of much greater severity are inflicted upon the latter than upon the former. We see this to this day, where white folk get probation or they just write it off and they throw a black child in jail. With very few exceptions, the penal laws to which which slaves only are subject, relate not only to the violations of the moral and divine laws, but positive institutions is only their sanction. Thus, if a slave is found beyond the limits of the town in which he lives, or off the plantation where he is usually employed, without the company of a white person, or without a written permission of his master, employer, etc., any person may apprehend and punish him with whipping on the bare back, not exceeding 20 lashes. In Mississippi, a similar punishment by direction of the justice of the peace. Also in Virginia and Kentucky, at the discretion of the justice, both to the imposition of the punishment and the number of stripes. I'm going to read this. This is in the footnote. It shall be the duty of the keeper of the penitentiary, on the receipt of the prisoner,